We'll be doing MCQs today. This is your first question. This is a case of hypertensive emergency. You see, the patient is a known case of hypertension, and he was brought to the emergency department. She was brought to the emergency department. Headache, blood vision, and BP is 220/95. So this is hypertensive emergency because the BP is too high, about 200 plus. There is end organ damage because there is blood vision. The patient also has headache. So this is a classic case of hypertensive emergency. The intern wants to give drug X, but what we are being told here is that it can cause tachycardia, it can exacerbate fluid retention, and this is important at Lupus-like syndrome. So many of you have said block calcium channel blocker CCP. CCP does not cause lupus-like reaction or fluid retention. Also, option. So what to do? Yes, exactly. The drug being talked about is hydralazine. Hydralazine causes lupus-like reaction. Very good. So what is the mechanism of mechanism of action of hydralazine? It is a vasodilator. It works by increasing the cGMP level. So guys, the answer is B. No problem. It's probably a difficult MCQ, but it works by increasing the cGMP levels. What happens is that due to increased cGMP, it causes muscular relaxation, smooth muscle relaxation. So when the smooth muscle relaxes, the blood pressure drops down, and its effect is quite its immediate effect. So it is used in hypertensive emergency. It can also be used in CHF, but it's not used nowadays. Nowadays, people prefer the other drugs, hydralazine, because of the side effect of lupus-like reaction. It is not preferred. That is why the attending said that not about not to give this drug. The effect is more on arterioles than veins, but still it does have effect on veins. That is why it causes fluid retention and compensatory tachycardia. When does compensatory tachycardia happen? Because when there is fluid retention in the system, there is decreased venous return because of the dilatation of the veins, and because of that decreased venous return, to maintain the minute volume of the which the heart is pumping, what the heart does is that uh, it causes compensatory tachycardia. Increases the heart rate, so that because there is already decreased volume due to the venous dilatation. So that is why that is the reason behind the compensatory tachycardia. And the decrease in afterload is also seen because of its more effect on the arterioles than veins. Okay, no problem. We'll move on to the next MCQ. Now, one thing that you all should realize here is what is the question? What the question clearly states is which of the following is most likely the root cause? Now, option B, option C, option B, option D, and option E, all these are manifestations of what. First of all, what is this condition we are talking about? We are talking about tetralogy of Fallot. I hope everyone got that. We are talking about tetralogy of Fallot, and what it has you have pulmonary stenosis, in that you have overriding of the aorta, you have ventricular septal defect, and you have right ventricular hypertrophy. These are the four manifestations of tetralogy of Fallot. These are not the root cause of the Fallot. Now, not many people know about this, but this is an important concept. I'll try to make this understand. You just have to remember one thing. Answer is A, and the root cause. Once you understand this concept, TOF or any other congenital heart disease would be very simple. Now there is a septum called infundibular septum, and what is the role of this infundibular septum? While uh, so this separates the aorta and the pulmonary artery while the child is developing in utero. So at this time, and this is also called as a septum spiral. Why? Because it moves in a spiral direction, so that it connects the aorta with the left ventricle and the pulmonary artery with the right ventricle. This is a septum which separates the aorta and the pulmonary artery. Both of them are simultaneous, are side by side, and the septum that separates it is the infundibular septum. Now what happens is that due to anterosuperior displacement, it is going to cause, you just realize that you just have two tubes, one above the other. The first one, the above one, is pulmonary artery, the lower one is the aorta. Now what happens is in between those tubes there is a septum. Now what happens if the septum is going to have displacement anterosuperior? It's going to narrow down the upper tube, which is the pulmonary artery. So after that is narrowed down, that it causes the pulmonary stenosis, and it is going to increase the size of the aorta. And when it increases the size of the aorta is going to come in contact with both RV and LV. Blood from both right ventricle and left ventricle is going to go into the aorta, and because of this, it is known as overriding of the aorta. Now, as I told that because of the anterosuperior displacement of the septum, the tube above the upper tube is pulmonary artery. It is going to be stenosed, and due to that stenosis, there is more strain on the right ventricle, and this strain causes the right ventricular hypertrophy. Now to maintain blood circulation, because you have to maintain blood circulation. Now if the blood is not going from RV to pulmonary to lungs in the time of cyanosis. We'll talk about that, but this is the reason why VSD is present. Now TOFV, there is cyanosis, right? But cyanosis is not always present. Normal condition, there may be many instances, like 99% of the time the child would not be cyanosed. When the cyanosis is present, it is only episodic, and there is a surge on catecholamines in the body, when there is usually some kind of stress or something, and there is a surge in catecholamines. This causes the infundibular spasm. What this infundibular spasm means is that this causes pulmonary stenosis. The infundibular spasm, that spasm causes pulmonary stenosis, and so that the blood cannot enter the pulmonary artery and the lungs. So there is no oxygenation. This leads to cyanosis. Now, whenever you are thinking about anything in cardiovascular system, about blood flows, about murmurs, always think that blood is going to go towards a path of least resistance, right? Now what will happen in this situation? Normally what happens, let's talk about the situation in which cyanosis is not present. So you have right ventricle has high pressure because of the hypertrophy and all, because of the pulmonary stenosis. But aorta is also very high. The left side of the body usually has much higher blood pressure than the right side, and so the left side aortic pressure is also high. There is VSD present, but the left ventricular pressure is also high. The only, even after pulmonary stenosis, the path of least resistance on the in normal circumstances would be through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. So still there would be a murmur, there would be some resistance along that path, but still that is the best possible option for the blood to go. So now what happens, that in the time of catecholamine surge, in the time when there is total pulmonary stenosis, very much spasm, the blood is going to find that the aorta is probably a path of lesser resistance, because there is too much resistance along the path of the pulmonary artery. So blood is not going to go into the lungs, blood is going to go into the aorta, and because blood is directed from the right ventricle to the aorta, this blood is not oxygenated blood, it causes cyanosis. It's a very simple concept. I want you all to understand this, why cyanosis happens. It is not always present, but like when catecholamines are normal, the cyanosis won't occur, but when there is a surge in catecholamines, it is going to that. During cyanotic path, the path of least resistance because of the aorta, right? And now what do we need to do to eliminate this cyanotic spell? To eliminate a cyanotic spell, we have to increase the aortic pressure, so that by increasing the aortic pressure, again, what the right ventricle is going to try to do, it's going to try to push the blood along the path of the least resistance. So even after the pulmonary stenosis, even when the catecholamines are present, increasing the aortic pressure is going to, the blood is going to find that the pulmonary artery pressure is comparatively less than the aorta, and this is done by squatting position. What happens in squatting position, there is femoral vein block, femoral artery block, and due to the femoral artery block, the pressure rises, which is transmitted back to the aorta. Now let's talk about the murmur in tetralogy of Fallot. Murmur is only present when there is a gradient, right? Pressure gradient. So in normal circumstances, I said, when there is no catecholamine surge, when there is no infundibular spasm, the blood is going to the path of least resistance from right ventricle to pulmonary artery. The pressure in right ventricle is high, the pressure in pulmonary artery is low, so there will be a murmur. There will be a murmur. We are not going into the details of what the murmur will be, but there will be a murmur. Right now, what will happen when when the patient is cyanotic, when there is a cyanotic spell going on right now? The pressure in the right ventricle will be high. The pressure in aorta will be high. The pressure in pulmonary, the blood is anyway not going into the pulmonary artery, but even there pressure is high. In left ventricle also the pressure is high. Everywhere the pressure is high, so there will be no murmur. So think about, so always keep in mind, there is blue TOF and pink TOF. Right, blue TOF is when cyanosis, and pink TOF is when the patient is not cyanotic. So pink TOF, there will be a murmur. Blue TOF, there will not be a murmur. Cyanosis present, no murmur, right? And when there is not cyanosis, murmur will be present. Now cardiac failure is not seen in TOF. Why? Because the blood is the blood is not going into the lungs. Without the blood going into the lungs, there is not going to be any kind of dyspnea, any kind of crackles or anything like that, because the blood is anyway not going into the lungs and the left side of the heart. When there is failure of the left side of the heart, there is more chance of cardiac failure. So cardiomegaly will also be not there. As I said, neonatal cyanosis is seen only in PDE. It is classic. TOF is going to present probably in the first few years of life. What complications are you going to see in TOF? It is polycythemia, it is brain abscess, it is infective endocarditis. And why is all this? Because the lung filter is bypassed in this scenario. What is the treatment? Beta blockers we are going to give during the time of cyanotic spells, because that decreases infundibular spasm. Now CCB should never be used in this scenario, because what CCB does, it's going to drop the arterial, it's going to decrease the arterial blood pressure, so there will be decreased aortic pressure. Aortic pressure is, if you decrease aortic pressure, the right ventricle is going to find that aorta is the path of least resistance. It's going to send blood into the aorta, and once it does that, we don't we have cyanosis, because that blood is not oxygenated, and the definitive treatment is of course surgery. Let's talk about simple murmur. Like you take aortic stenosis or you take mitral stenosis murmur. When do you see the murmur? You see the murmur when the blood is going from a path of from a place where it is of high pressure to a path of low pressure. So when there is a pressure gradient, only then there is going to be murmur, or opposite way, when it's going from low pressure to a high pressure area. Now with mitral stenosis, you consider mitral stenosis. The pressure in left atrium is too much, and it has to there is also a mitral also, it has to overcome those pressure, the blood has to overcome the pressure. In left ventricle pressure is also high, but it is probably more high than left atrium. So what the blood has to do, it has to overcome that pressure, and when it tries to open the mitral bar to go through that pressure, there is a murmur. It is because of the pressure gradient. Murmur is always present when there is a pressure gradient. In aortic stenosis also, the left ventricle, the aortic pressure is higher than the left ventricular pressure, and there is aortic stenosis. When there is regurgitation also, the left ventricular pressure is going to be more than aortic pressure, so blood has to come back, blood will come back, right? So this happens. So when there is, blood always moves from a path of high pressure to low pressure, it's going to find that. So in the time of cyanotic spell, let's talk about the time when there is no cyanotic spell, when the patient is normal. The pink top. So when there is no cyanosis, what happens? That there is no infundibular spasm. There is no infundibular spasm. So there is, the pressure in pulmonary artery is a bit, it's increased than normal, but it is still not high as of the aorta, because aortic pressure, we know it's 120/80. Pulmonary artery, I don't know the figures, but it's around 25 mmHg. It will be increased from 25, but it will not reach the 120 level of the aorta. So when the right ventricle has to push blood, it is going to find that pulmonary artery pressure is less, so it is going to push blood into the pulmonary artery. Now when this happens, there is a pressure gradient, because the blood is going from right ventricle. Right ventricle pressure is very high in this situation because of the hypertrophy, or because of the strain. So it pushes the blood into the pulmonary artery, and at this time, because of the gradient, because right ventricular pressure is high, the pressure in the pulmonary artery is not present, so it is low, so there will be a murmur because of the pressure gradient. When there is cyanosis, when there is infundibular spasm, when there is severe pulmonary stenosis, the pressure in all areas is going to be high. The pressure in aorta is high, the pressure in pulmonary artery is high, the pressure in left ventricle is high. Remember, there is a VSD, so we also have to take into account the factor of left ventricle. So the pressure in left ventricle is high, and the pressure in right ventricle is also high. So all the entire system, from where the blood is going to where the blood is to the place where the blood is going, each and every place there is high pressure, and due to this high pressure, there is no murmur, because it is not traveling from a point of high pressure to low pressure. It is just going from right ventricle with high pressure to aorta with high pressure. So when there is no pressure gradient, there is not going to be a murmur. So cyanosis, there is no murmur. When there is not cyanosis in the patient, when there is pink off, there is going to be a murmur, and the murmur is going to be a pulmonary stenosis. Move to the next question. What do you think this case is about? This case is about myocardial infarction, right? And what they are asking is which vessel is going to be responsible for this findings? And this is a very tough question. The answer D is the correct answer, and I would love if the one who has given the answer D could write why she thinks that answer D is the correct, because this is a very difficult question. Again, this is a very important concept, but very difficult, and that is why I've picked these questions, because you are going to have many easy questions in your regular preparations. I'm trying to teach you some different concepts that maybe there are that are not that students are usually not familiar with these concepts. Okay, so this question is about myocardial infarction and the complication of myocardial infarctions, right? So what is the complication? It is clearly written that there is severe mitral regurgitation. So when does mitral regurgitation happen? When the mitral regurgitation happens, when there is papillary muscle rupture. There are two papillary muscles, the anterior papillary muscle and the posterior papillary muscle, and rupture of any of these can cause myocardial infarction post myocardial, can cause mitral regurgitation post myocardial infarction. Now this patient, why do we say that this is a posterior? This is a case of posterior papillary muscle rupture because anterior is supplied by two arteries, by left anterior descending artery and left circumflex artery. So infarction is very rare. Now, by posterior papillary muscle is only supplied by the posterior descending artery. So infarction of the posterior descending artery, so or a block of the posterior descending artery can cause infarction at the stage at the immediate one, can rupture a few days after that. So and tear a few days later. PDA, the posterior descending artery, causes posterior papillary muscle rupture, while anterior is very rare because it is supplied as dual blood supply. And as we know, with dual blood supply, one artery blocks, it is going to be compensated by other arteries. So anterior rupture is pretty rare compared to posterior rupture, and that is why posterior rupture is more common, and the answer is posterior descending artery, option D. Okay, next question. How do we say that this is Takayasu's arteriitis, right? First thing is only major thing. Look, this fever, night sweats, arthralgias, these are very non-specific symptoms. You don't have to focus on these things. What is important here is that this is a girl, this is a woman, female gender, Asian, right, and a 16-year-old. All these are predisposing factors of Takayasu's arteriitis, and the most important sign, most important words given is the thickening of the great vessels. Now there are only two diseases, two common diseases with great vessels. One is giant cell arteriitis, and the other is Takayasu. Moreover, right? Giant cell arteriitis is typically seen in children greater than in people greater than 70 years of age. It is also seen more commonly in women, but it is very common in elderly. Definitely above 50, you are not going to see a case of 16-year-old with giant cell arteriitis. It is definitely above 50, most likely above 70. You will see giant cell arteriitis. So the weak persistent Takayasu arteriitis is also known as pulseless disease, right? Why? Because there is so much thickening, there is decreased pulses in the upper extremities. So that is why it is known as pulseless disease. So the answer is option E. As I said, these are the risk factors, and there's no GCA because it is seen in elderly, weak pulseless disease. And yes, complications are very important. You may be asked what treatment is practiced for now. What happens if you are not treating this condition? If you are not treating this condition, if it is undiagnosed or something for a long time, it can cause, because it is a large vessel disease, it can cause aneurysm. Aortic arch aneurysm is probably the most common among the aneurysms of the aorta. So that is a complication which you should think about when you are given a case of Takayasu and untreated Takayasu in particular. Okay, great, good. Next question. Okay, so this question I typically prepared because this is a classic USMLE question. What happens is that what is given is right there in front of you. It is a very simple question if you know what to find in the question. The answer is C, ventricular dysfunction. This is just a simple case of left heart failure. There is nothing else you need to think about in this case. It is all other things are just given just to confuse you. Look, here shortness of breath, right? Shortness of breath. It is classic CHF. There is nothing else to you have to think about. Bilateral crackles you have. There is difficulty breathing. Lung auscultation, bilateral crackles, right? Blood pressure is normal, heart rate is normal. There are no rubs, so you don't have to think about your option C once there. Fibrotic debris within the pericardial membrane. What is that? That is constrictive pericarditis. Constrictive pericarditis, you will have a friction rub, so that is not an answer. You said ischemia of the myocardium. The ischemia of the myocardium is going to present with severe chest when you are talking about MI. This patient has just the shortness of breath, so MI is not there. Then we have aortic stricture. Aortic stricture, of course, you're not going to have aortic stricture without a murmur, right? So this is very simple question. Fibrosis of the endocardium. Can anyone say which disease fibrosis of the endocardium is associated with? Fibrosis of the endocardium. In which disease can you do you see fibrosis? It is usually seen with carcinoid tumor. It is a rare finding in carcinoid tumor, but even that is not the carcinoid tumor will also have a murmur. You will see fever and etc. You will see the basic symptoms of fever, fatigue, pain, etc. in carcinoid, and that is why there is a simple case of CHF, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, bilateral crackles. there are no pointers, no of hypertension, etc. So this is just a ventricular dysfunction. Okay, so I hope you know now that how you should be approaching the MCQs. You have just a simple case bilateral crackles and difficulty breathing. Just that all other things are given just to distract you. You do not have to focus on anything else. You just have to keep your mind focused on this simple fact and just to see the options and go for it. Okay, next question. Simple question. Option C. You have just, unfortunately, you have just one answer, 1% with the answer. But this is like an easy question. What condition we are talking about here? We are talking about that this at the age of 9, when the patient was a child, he had developed rheumatic fever, and now he has rheumatic heart disease. Unfortunately, he was not probably treated for a long time with penicillin as required for 10 years, or according to the protocols, he was not treated, and that's why he has developed. What is the condition? What is the problem? What is the pathology? He is having mitral stenosis. Now, how do we know that this is mitral stenosis? First, because it is the most common complication post rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever. If there is immediate in the immediate afterwards of having rheumatic fever, if the patient presents, it is more likely to be mitral regurgitation. But if the patient presents a long time after the rheumatic fever, it is more likely going to be mitral stenosis. And the low pitch diastolic rumble heard best at the apex is the best description of mitral stenosis. Now, let's even talk a bit about diastolic and systolic murmurs. So what is so S1 is the okay, let's finish this MCQ. So no, let's talk about the diastolic and systolic murmurs. S1 is the sound heard due to closure of the mitral and the tricuspid valves, and S2 is due to closure of the aortic and the pulmonary valve. So what happens in between this time? In between this time, there is systole, because after the mitral valve is closed and before and in between, when the aortic valve is closed, there is systole. The left ventricle ejects all the blood, and between S2 and S1 there is diastole. So the aortic valve is closed, the mitral valve is open at that time, and the blood comes from left atrium to the left ventricle in that time, and afterwards there is S1 again. So the mitral valve closes. So this is the phase of diastole. Now this is a diastolic murmur. So which murmur is, so what happens in the diastole? Blood comes from left atrium to left ventricle, and when this happens, blood is coming from left atrium to left ventricle, there is a murmur. Here it is described as diastolic murmur. So diastolic murmur is seen in conditions like mitral stenosis, because at this time the blood is going from left atrium to the left ventricle, and there is obstruction in the path of the blood flow. So there is murmur. Other murmurs which you see are opening snap and all, but it is difficult to find. This is probably a classic description. Now, left side, and please also talk about inspiration, expiration, and left side inspiration and expiration effects on the murmur. What happens is that look, when the flow of the blood is going to increase, the intensity of the murmur is going to increase. So in what happens in inspiration, diaphragm goes down. There is a decrease in the intrathoracic pressure. The decrease in the intrathoracic pressure causes an increase in the venous return, and when the venous return increases, there is more blood coming from superior vena cava, from inferior vena cava, into the right atrium, into the right ventricle, into the pulmonary arteries. So what happens is that inspiration, there is an increase in the right-sided murmurs. Now, what happens in expiration? In expiration, the lungs are going to collapse. After at this phase, in between the inspiration and expiration, the lungs are filled with blood. The lungs are totally filled with blood. There is blood in the lungs, and when there is expiration, the lungs are going to contract, and so that blood is going to be pushed through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, into the aorta. So left-sided murmurs are going to be more seen in expiration. Right side are going to be more seen in inspiration. And left lateral positions, what happens in the left lateral position? The heart, the apex is going to come more close to the body wall. So if your murmur is, so if there is written that it is heard more prominently in the left lateral position, it is going to be a murmur which is probably heard best at the apex. Now, which murmurs are heard best at the apex? It is most likely it is going to be the mitral stenosis. Other mitral regurgitation can also be there, but it radiates. Where does it radiate? It radiates to the axilla. Right. So if you see this case, so another presentation maybe that's like this, that low pitched diastolic murmur and which is seen more prominently in expiration because it is left-sided murmur, and more in left lateral position. Also, it can be described as when the patient is holding his breath. So what happens when the patient is holding his breath? There is no respiration. There is still greater amount of pressure into intrathoracic cavity, and this pressure helps the lungs to push blood into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, into the aorta. So left-sided murmurs are going to be more seen in this condition. Here there is mitral stenosis. So what happens in mitral stenosis? There is increased left atrial pressure. It is just simple that because the blood is unable to go from left atrium to left ventricle. There is more blood, more pressure. So that is the basic thing behind this MCQ. Next one. The answer is option B. The inhibits the prostaglandin E2 formation. That is going to be the drug, because what is anyone can say that this is probably you would know that this patent ductus arteriosus is PDA, but what is the reason behind PDA? Can you find that in the case? Why did this baby develop PDA? Is there something in the case that points to a particular symptom, points a particular disease, points a particular condition which has resulted in the PDA? Okay, you see, the important point here is that the mother was not immunized as a child. So the mother had rubella infection. The maternal rubella infection has caused the patent ductus arteriosus in this baby. And the patent ductus arteriosus can, yes, exactly, mom is not immunized, can have a continuous murmur which is present in both systole and diastole. Now, what mechanism, what pharmac concept will help you in this solving this MCQ is that always remember PGE2 is going to help you keep the ductus open. So if you want to, if there are some conditions which are ductus dependent condition in which there is blood cannot circulate from one side of the body to the other side of the body if there is no ductus arteriosus. So in those conditions you want to keep ductus arteriosus open, you don't want it to close. So in what does so you give PGE1, PGE2 in those conditions, and it helps you to keep the ductus open. So anything that is going to inhibit the PGE2 formation like NSAIDs is going to close the ductus arteriosus. And if the simple thing is that you all just remember that NSAIDs are going to close and PGE2 is going to keep it open, NSAIDs block PGE2 formation. So that is how that is the mechanism of action. The drug being talked about is NSAIDs, and PGE2, as I said, keeps the ductus arteriosus open. It is associated with maternal rubella infection. Okay, next MCQ. The answer is A as here. Now, what is important is that it is already given that it is PSVT, it is paroxysmal supraventricular. What they are asking is that how are you going to diagnose and how are you going to abolish this PSVT? So the important thing in this that it is also mentioned that the low toxicity. Now, adenosine is an ideal drug in this condition. Why? Because it blocks the AV nodal condition. And how does it does that? It hyperpolarizes the AV nodal tissue because it increases the conductance of potassium. There is more potassium into the AV node, and it reduces the calcium current. So with a decrease with more potassium, it is more difficult to negative polarization to bring, and with less and with by reducing the calcium current, you won't have the phase zero of the action potential curve. So with that, it is going to be more difficult to block. It is going to be more easy to block the AV node. So and since it is PSVT, it depends on the atrioventricular conduction. So by blocking that circuit, you are going to be terminating the attack of PSVT, and it also, if it is terminated, it is also diagnostic that okay, that this condition was PSVT. So the conduction through AV node is markedly reduced, and the low side effect, low toxicity is because that it has very short duration of action. In 15 seconds, it is nearly eliminated from the body. So here its action is finished. Due to the extreme short duration of action, there is very less chance of any of its toxicity. But if it may happen, it is hypotension, flushing, chest pain, dyspnea. But it is very rare because in 15 seconds its action is done. Okay, so next question. Okay, so yeah, this was a very tricky question, and yeah, this is not a difficult question. It's a tricky question because the usual treatment. What condition are we talking about here? We are talking about pericarditis, right? What are the causes of pericarditis? The most common cause is viral cause. The most common is probably idiopathic, but the next common is viral. Coxsackie virus and all. But in those conditions, those are the conditions in which we give non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Those are the first thing. Answer option D is definitely wrong because this is pericarditis. This is not pericardial effusion. So you do pericardiocentesis when there is, fluid or blood, when there is inside the pericardial sac. At that time, you can put a needle, you can drain the fluid out. But this is just pericarditis, it's just the inflammation of the pericardial sac. And how do we know that it is pericarditis? Because the chest pain is relieved when the patient leans forward. We have ECG, there is diffuse ST segment elevations. So all these things are diffuse ST segment elevation. Whenever you see, it is always pericarditis. It's just one cause in which it is there is ST segment elevation in all these. It is pericarditis. There may also be a large MI, but it's never going to be in all these. All these, if you see, it is always pericarditis. This is a case of pericarditis, and the cause here is uremic pericarditis. You see, the patient has chronic renal failure, and it is poorly controlled diabetes mellitus also. So the cause is uremic pericarditis due to the renal failure, chronic renal failure, poorly controlled diabetes, which is affecting the kidneys, and that is why the answer is dialysis. The dialysis is going to be the most appropriate treatment at this time for the patients. NSAIDs you should have answered in patients with pericarditis in which which has a viral etiology or idiopathic etiology. Here we know the etiology is uremia, and uremia is best treated with dialysis. Pericardiocentesis definitely just clear whenever there is any fluid or anything in between in the pericardial sac. You choose when there is cardiac tamponade. You choose pericardiocentesis is the answer. This is just an inflammation of the pericardial sac. So pericardiocentesis is if there is too much of inflammation, then we can do pericardiectomy. We just remove the entire pericardium, but definitely not pericardiocentesis. Centesis means you just drain the fluid out. There is no fluid here. There is inflammation. So the answer is dialysis because it is uremia. Right. As I said, NSAIDs you go for NSAIDs when the question is about viral or idiopathic. These are the etiologies: Coxsackie, adenovirus, HIV, bacterial. Also, it can be neoplastic, autoimmune. Uremic pericarditis we talked about, cardiovascular or idiopathic, right? So yes, so this is the pericarditis. Now this is also a nice conceptual question. I probably got confused with the jugular venous distension, and also that you want to remove the fluid using the there fluid overload, but it is clearly written in the first line that the patient has presented to the emergency department in shock. The patient is in shock right now. So, and look at the BP, the blood pressure is 85 over 45, even where there is versus paradoxus phenomenon seen here. But even without that, the blood pressure is 85 on 45. So, the patient is in shock. He has very low BP. So, in this low BP, if we're going to diurese the patient, what fluid is going to be left in the body of the in the circulation? So definitely it is not diuresis. Can anyone tell that which condition are they talking about here? I'll try to enlist what they are saying. The patient has distant heart sounds. The patient has jugular venous distension. The patient has hypotension. The patient has this is pulsus paradoxus phenomenon is being talked about here. That yes, exactly. This pericardial effusion. This is cardiac tamponade. Right. So what ideal think? Just forget the pericardial effusion, forget the cardiac tamponade. The patient is in shock. You have to give IV fluids. That's it. That's a simple way to answer this question. The patient is in shock, low BP. What's the first thing you do? You push fluids. Even in your hospital, what do you do when the patient comes to emergency department? You start fluids. That's always the first thing that you do. Now, so I try to not put a confusing options here, but now let's say that if I had put another option in which there was written pericardiocentesis, what would you have chosen? IV fluids or pericardiocentesis? Just write in the questions, just write what would you have chosen, IV fluids or pericardiocentesis, if pericardiocentesis was in the option. Yes, exactly, IV fluids. The patient is in shock. The first and foremost thing that you have to do is IV fluids. Don't get confused. The patient, this is a simple question that if the patient is in shock, give IV fluids. So we'll just talk a little bit about cardiac tamponade, and I think then the time would be up. So the Beck's triad is important: distant heart sounds, increased jugular venous pressure, and hypotension. Pulsus paradoxus. What is the pulsus paradoxus? That is that look what happens in the inspiration. In inspiration, I said diaphragm moves down. There is decreased interthoracic pressure. There is increased venous return. And now, in usual circumstances, the right side would distend a bit because there is no pericardial effusion. It can distend, and the right atrium and the right ventricle are going to accommodate the increased venous return. Now, what will happen in this pericardial in cardiac temporal and pericardial effusion is that the right ventricle is not going to accommodate because it is surrounded by the fluid. It is surrounded by the cardiac temporal. There is fluid all around, so it has no distension capacity. So, but still, the blood is going to come in the inspiration because of the increased venous return. So, it is going to push the left ventricle, and the cavity size of the left ventricle is going to decrease. There will be bulging of the intraventricular septum, and LV is going to be compressed. And because of that LV compression, the blood pressure is going to drop because the blood is, it is going to go less into the systemic circulation, into the aorta, into the other arteries. So this is the cause of the pulsus paradoxus phenomenon. This is an exaggerated reduction. There is nothing paradoxal about it. It's just an exaggerated reduction of the ventricular volumes. With the stroke volumes are going to be decreased, and systolic pressure is also going to drop. Inotropes and pericardiocentesis would be needed in this patient, but the first step in the management is definitely IV fluids.